Bad Manner Productions AU or Ideal Thomas characters are an interesting series of videos where he basically goes over his ideas for alternate bases of Thomas the Tank Engine and other characters. And many have criticized this series for certain takes on characters, and today I decided it would be interesting to basically react to all of his current Ideal Soto characters. So let's get into it. Thomas. So his Ideal Thomas is basically a J72 with some mods. I have honestly nothing to say about this besides the fact that it fixes the 1914 problem, where Thomas is basically older than Gordon. But other than that, it's a pretty normal interpretation of the character that fixes the 1914 problem. Percy. Okay, so Percy being an old engine who is cheeky is meh, but I honestly don't really care for much for it, to be honest. It's not choice, but it's his AU, so I don't really care. Him being from the Metropolitan Railway is interesting, but there's not much else I can comment on. Edward and James. Okay, so the cab and frame swap is interesting, but yeah, Edward is funnily enough pretty accurate here, more closer to the K2 class. And the same thing for James. The cab and frame swap is interesting, and I'm glad that BM didn't go with the Q1 design for James. The GRD81 is fine, it weirdly matches up with James, but okay, I have a problem with something. The running plate and the buffer beams are fine as black. Yes, even with the red wheels it looks okay. The yellow running board is awful to look at. It looks like it's made out of plastic mustard. And I'm glad that he also didn't go with an LMS crab design for James too, because that's honestly like the least thing. That's honestly, it doesn't scream out James, to be honest here. Henry. I do somewhat agree with the splashers, but there's not much else I can say. It's fine. It's nothing really too special or crazy. It's just overall improvements. Gordon. Okay, this is interesting. Making a Gordon an A2 weirdly makes sense. That way you have the Flying Scotsman being the A1 slash A3, Spencer being the A4, and Gordon being an A2, thus completing the entire Pacific family. However, his name becoming Gordon is also really interesting as well as the fact that he was on Sora during the late 30s. That's really all I have to say. Toby. Toby's height is the only thing I agree with in this video, but everything else is just odd. For starters, just because Toby has a tram skirt doesn't mean he has to be female. Gendered clothing shouldn't really exist when it comes to locomotives, and you kill two birds with one stone with Toby still being a dude, but having a tram skirt. For one, you keep the original personality of Toby, and you still stick with the colloquialism, I think that's how you pronounce it, of skirt. And I mean, I guess the whole Mavis debacle is maybe one of the reasons why Awdry left, but I also believe it was because he wanted to stop at Duke the Lost Engine and he didn't want to make any more stories. I think that's really why Awdry didn't continue on after book 27, and that's why Christopher eventually came into the fray in the early 80s, I believe. Duck. Duck being a 7400 is, well, interesting. I hate how he looks like an Amazon box now, but it's certainly inventive. Also, regardless how you feel about Bad Manor Productions' take on Duck, you do have to realize that Wilbur really did let his biases take hold. It's not really a bad thing, but it is certainly noticeable within the Railway series and, by extension, Thomas the Tank Engine. Oliver. Oh boy. So it's interesting that Oliver is now from the Great Eastern Railway now, and that he's an 044. Despite the fact that Oliver really isn't a Great Western anymore, it's perfectly fine, and I don't really get why so many people were pissed about Oliver not being from the Great Western anymore. It's, in my opinion, completely fine since he still has the push-pull mechanic bullcrap, whatever the hell you want to call it. So, to me, it's completely fine. I don't see anything wrong with his ideal Oliver. A lot of people got pissed off because this apparently throws off the whole Great Western dynamic, but or the Little Western dynamic. I'm sorry, it's called the Little Western. But the reason why it's called the Little Western isn't because that the Great Western engines work on it at all. It's actually because it's really because it's on the west side of Sodor and it's a little branch line. That's personally why I believe it's called a Little Western and not the Great Western, because it was called, the branch one was called the Great Western, then it would make more sense to have nothing but Great Western engines on it. But Donald and Douglas, I think a lot of people forget that Donald and Douglas both work on the Little Western. So that also throws off the whole dynamic if you really want to go that far. and honestly, I don't see why people are complaining about it in the comments of his Oliver video. It's honestly pretty dumb in my opinion. But regardless, Diesel. I hate the paint job, but that's really all I have to say. I don't really care for the alternate design of him being whatever the hell he was, class '09 something. I forgot what the hell he said. It's not really important to me, to be honest here. Donald. The Fowler tender is cool, but I hate the paint job. I get the design, but it honestly just looks off. It looks like someone took a crayon and mismatched him. But other than that, there's not much else I have to say about the alterations. I don't really care. Boko. Boko being blue looks nice on him, and him being given the number 12 is a pretty good decision overall. The reverse Boki's decision is also fine as well. It actually kind of makes a little bit more sense. And then we have one of the worst videos he's ever produced, which is the bear video. This is one of the few times I have a problem with the basis. Bear looks good as a class 35. I don't understand why the hell you would need to change him at all. The face is also something I don't like, but it more or less comes from the fact that now he went with a baby warship design for Bear, which I get what you're trying to do with Bear. Like, Bear is essentially still like a little bit of the same character in Bad Manners AU, but like, why would you choose the baby warship? In my opinion, that should go to Diesel 10, and only Diesel 10 looks good as like a baby warship, or a warship in general, to be honest here. I do not understand why they went with like the warship design for Bear. That does not suit Bear at all. He's fine as a class 35. I don't get it. I don't mind Bear being proud because he's not necessarily demeaning towards the steam engines in this AU, so that's the least of my worries. I get that Bad Matter Productions wants diversity in his cast, but for the Diesels, just leave them the fuck alone. There's no reason why you need to make Bear not a class 35. There's no reason for that to happen. There's no reason. There's just no reason for me to see that. I get the whole diversity, but honestly, that's more applicable towards the tank engines and the tender engines. I don't get why you would need to make something like that for the Diesels. But anyways, that's just me. Daisy. There's not much else to say about Daisy. The yellow design goes nice with the green, but that's like not really much else. Mavis is overall the same thing. There's nothing really much to say about Mavis. Douglas. The whistle swap makes sense, as well as delivering the tender. The blue wheels also make a lot of sense too. Again, this version of Douglas is very well thought out. In my opinion, is probably one of the best takes in my opinion. Well, one of the best takes. There's actually a better one coming up soon. Trevor, the Halloween scheme is okay. There's not much else to say. Birdie is also fine. Not much else to say. Scarlet, he's the same engine with the paint swap and not much else to it. Bill and Ben have been the victim of Bad Manor Productions' diversity in engines, but this weirdly works out. I was initially opposed to it, but honestly this is a pretty fascinating change. Making Bill and Ben wing tanks is interesting as it makes them appear more unnatural and could freak out engines like Gordon or Boko with their appearance. Overall, an interesting take on the twin engines and a very detailed backstory for their bases also. Murdoch. Honestly, considering that the only defining trait of Murdoch was that whole peace and quiet thing, I don't really care for Murdoch being female or pessimistic. As long as she still keeps the core trait of Murdoch, it's fine. The only problem I have with this interpretation of Murdoch is the ugly ass green on her. You might as well paint her black if you're gonna make her this green. Like, just paint her black at this point. It makes more sense. Or the apple green livery, I think. Rheneas. He's the same as Scarloey. Painted green and not much else. Annie and Clarabelle, I'm fine with them not being push-pull cultures. The face is but it's still relatively interesting. Peter Sam, him being red is fine. There's not much else to say about his take on Peter Sam. George, I have nothing to say about George. Rosie is a pretty interesting take. I've never seen Rosie with gray on her, and it surprisingly works. The side rods are also cool, and I'm glad he stayed with Rosie being a side tank. The only change I'd make is keeping the name Rosie, as in my opinion, there really is no such thing as a quote-unquote American name. Literally, most of the names over here in America don't really originate from America, unless you're counting the Native Americans. But other than that, there's not really much else to say about that. Sir Topham Hatt, I had nothing to say about him. Bulgy, besides the gender change, I don't really care, to be honest. The gender change is kind of a funny nod, and I do like that. So, Sir Handel, there's not much else to say. You'll notice how probably if he ever does update the thingy with more Skarloey engines, I probably won't really have much of a reaction here. There's not much he can screw up when it comes to the Skarloey engines as much as he can do with the standard gauge engines. So yeah, I don't really care. There probably might be one change, and that might be Ivo Hugh or Freddy. I don't know if those are even canon in his universe, but whatever, I suppose. In short, I like Bad Matter Productions AU for Thomas the Tank Engine, and on the whole, it has some weird choices, but I do respect it, and I hope this series gets expanded upon even further. I understand his philosophy behind his AU, his diversity in tank engines, while an eyesore makes sense. The tender engines also make sense. The road vehicles and the narrow gauge engines I have no problems with. The only two that really piss me off are Toby and Bear, but I have to respect the creativity and dedication to certain terms. But it does piss me off sometimes. Anyways, that was the video, and I hope you enjoyed. See you later.